join us for a bit. Possibly had an appointment, so couldn't make it for today's session, or possibly might drop in for a bit. But let's just start off with a quick, like a minute check-in. Harlan, since you're new here, do you want to go first and share a bit so others have context? I can just say real quick, Harlan's work has inspired me over the years. He's, I would say, done some real deep thinking for what, 7, 8 years now in the context of reputation and building trust-based systems, but I'll let him share more.
Sure, thanks, Sid. Yeah, let's see where to start. Yeah, I've been doing work with reputation systems and decentralized social networks before that was the cool thing to call them, and mostly in the like ideation and prototype kind of space. So I'm a software developer, and so I've been doing hundreds of prototypes in the last 10 or 15 years inside project land, and working with my collaborator Adam Apollo on a project called Core Network, which you can see at core.network, which encompasses a lot of these technologies, including reputation and visualization and lots of other goodies. And yeah, that might be finally imminent. Feels like it's really time for this to launch on all of the levels. And yeah, I've been interested in holochain since before it was a thing, like at Scepter meetups and stuff before they launched holochain. And yeah, really love Art and Eric's work and love the stuff that's coming out of holochain. And I feel like it's slowly getting more and more baked and closer to being usable for production projects, and looking forward to that too. So thanks. Oh, also I've got to drop a little, around the 45-minute mark, just to acknowledge.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and let's just go around. Everyone else can share real quick what they've been up to. Or maybe I can start calling. Alban, do you want to go?
Always, always. Yes, today I just came back from town. Actually, today we had to castrate our cat, so we castrated 2 little kittens, which was a bit sad and kind of glad that everything went good. So yeah, everything is good. We're happy. I work. We're trying to I work with some people, and we're trying to galvanize some collaborators to build some tools, and we want to put those tools in a library that progressive institutions, governments, local governments, state governments, but mostly local governments, could use to better organize themselves and to have an advantage on that matter. And we're trying to galvanize this process, and that entails we have created a space, and we offer a free space. So this is sort of our approach for now.
Cool. Do you want to call someone else?
Yes, Gregory, why not?
Hey, thanks, my man. Yeah, actually, I published a paper in Medium about a showing up currency. And it's just kind of this idea of putting context and maybe accounting for your time, right? And trying to tie that to reputation and some kind of like avatar to say, oh, like I can quickly look at this person and see kind of if they show up or where they're showing up. kind of thing. So, this is coming out of the design course, so I threw in some death cycles, right? It's a temporary currency. So I wanted to almost like a bolt-on device that you could put onto your content. And hence, this is where I found this little transcription and timestamping tool. I'm like, oh, even better, like machines can start doing this better than humans, right? And it's basically an archiving economy. Or for the showing up, and then a second paper for an archiving economy that that goes ahead and timestamps or incentivizes timestamping of data and video data online. And I want to tie it too into if you're not only do you timestamp, but if you're being time-stamped as someone who creates content, right? And that can kind of account for or give context in the fake news world. Instead of fact checking, you'll have extreme context. And so say, Sid, you're always, creating content. And so you get archived at 10,000 videos or something like that, right? And so people know that other humans are watching you. So yeah, so I've got some Medium articles out, and so I'll put them in the chat and get some feedback from you guys.
Cool. Call on someone.
Lynn.
I'm Lynn. Harlan, your name is really familiar, but I can't quite place from where. But part of that because my brain doesn't remember as well as it used to, I'm sure. Anyway, I help out with Holo REA on the sidelines. My main work right now is called Value Flows, which is a next economy networked vocabulary for, semantic web, but anything really, any kind of technology. And the hope is that it is helpful in gluing together different apps and different agents and networks into more seamlessly into some kind of new economy that is better than what we got. So, and lately, I don't know, I've just been poking around a little stuff, not really, yeah, nothing big to claim here. Trying to get oriented to this the fast changing world, I guess, is one thing I'm doing. Oh, well, I guess Bob.
Okay, I help Lynn with value flows, and this is sort of like culmination of something that I started about 1995. I started working on and understanding the necessity for economic networks as a seed form for a next economy. And so I think, by the way, that I think I remember Harlan Wood. Do I remember you from Webs of Trust? Web of Trust? Huh?
Sounds right.
Yeah. Okay. Other places too, but that's I think the first place that I ran into your name. It's very good. Okay, love it. Yeah. All right. So Web of Trust is necessary for economic networks. By God. So anyway, so and on this kind of stuff, I also help Lynn with helping with Holo REA and seeing what else everybody's doing around here. And with that, I will go back to lurking. Oh, wait, I'm supposed to finger somebody. Who's left? Anybody left?
There's Kamal and me.
Oh, Kamal. Okay. Well, Sid, I thought you already went. Wait a minute. Kamal. Let's go with Kamal. Hi.
Let's give him some time. Maybe he hasn't set up yet. I can go.
Yeah, I think Sid, you're on.
Yeah, I can go. I've been, yeah, what's been up? All kinds of things. A little frustrated with not getting to explore, or the fact that RSM isn't out and rolled out yet, and that's hampered progress, and I've been a little held back by that, but it's given us time to think through a few things. There's been some amount of conversation about the format of hackalongs. If we want to explore the, how we want to take things forward, do we want to take conversations more specific? So maybe marketplaces has its own direction, maybe neighborhoods has its own direction, and do we want to go in that way, or do we want to keep it, this as the general meeting place every week? So if you have thoughts, yeah, please message me, and I'd love to, talk about it with you guys. Apart from that, some amount of strategizing for how to orchestrate the work we've been doing, especially with POSPI. We've been thinking about neighborhoods as the container for all of the work that's going on. And then, small allied projects within that. So bazaars, the reputation wall within that, and trying to figure out how to roll it out, when to roll it out, when to start talking about it. Yeah, that's what's been up. Of course, all of that is tied in with the rollout of RSM. So yeah, waiting on that. Kamal, are you back yet? Do you want to go, or we can just start off with our topic for today?
Came up in chat and said he can't speak at the moment.
Oh, okay, cool. Thanks, Greg.
Sid,
Yeah.
I have a question. What do you
Yes.
know about when RSM is rolling out?
I think the answer to that is we don't know. Yeah, I think there is some insight on what's new, what we're gonna have to adapt to, and so that's been really helpful. A few people also have access to the GitHub, but I think until the libraries are stable, there's a lot of folks who aren't feeling comfortable enough to actually start developing using it. I know Philip Beadle has taken the leap, and because he has early access, he's been, going through some of it. Yeah, that's all I know, and that's all that we know at this stage. I definitely was hoping, last month would have been a month where it would have been rolled out and a lot more stable, but not yet. So I guess we wait. Yeah. Harlan, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm
please.
sorry. Can you say what is the thing that you're talking about?
Oh,
the rollout?
RSM. So it's the previous refactor, I guess, of Holochain is now being referred to as Redux, and RSM is, what's the full form? Rapid State Module. I'm not sure the full form is even. But
it's the next version of Holochain Core.
Yeah. But
That's
just speeds things up significantly, and which is why I think most people are waiting.
I thought RSM stood for real soon maybe.
Maybe you should suggest that.
As I recall, it's essentially using the multi-threaded nature of Rust more so than the previous version, which was kind of centralizing everything through a single store, Redux-like.
Yeah, and which is why I think things are, the phrase being used is several orders of magnitude faster. So, so we're really hopeful. And basically, there's a bunch of developers who just said it makes sense to just wait that little longer, develop. Yeah, so that's what's up. Should we dive right into it? Since we've got about 40 minutes left. Today's topic, we aren't really covering a project. It's quite specific, really. We're just talking about bridging, and that is a critical topic because anyone looking to use the modularity theme, which is packaging every little building block as its own DNA, there's some pretty significant concerns around bridging, and these concerns have been discussed, and some sorts of solutions have been arrived at through these discussions. Again, this doesn't mean this is steady state or that the final solution has been arrived at. And so what I could do is just like share almost like a snapshot of the different kinds of bridging and what's been, discussed and arrived at so far. And this is through conversations with the other people in the other hackalong, with GM, through conversations in the dev camp, questions that people have had, and what people want to use bridging for. So I can share my screen and run us through it. But before that, does anyone have any specific questions or anything specifically they'd like to talk about bridging today? To talk about related to bridging? Yeah, Lynn, go ahead.
I think this is probably related to bridging, although I'm not positive. But if you could hit as you go through, if bridging is a way to internetwork people who are in different apps but need to do something, not as a permanent relationship with each other, but like the simplest example, I suppose, is the marketplace or something, some kind of exchange, or is bridging a way to build networks within Holochain of people and groups, or is it not really? So that,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because bridging is seen differently by different groups in the ecosystem, and I guess that's natural with Holochain. So there's some people who are looking at bridging purely as within the app bundle. So within the same app, you've got different DNAs just coordinating with each other, and that I would say is relatively simple, because everyone has access to the same DNAs and validation is pretty straightforward. But people like me and some of the conversations in the Modularity Hackalong have been focused around cross app, cross neighborhood, cross community bridging, where you brought up the example of marketplace. Like, I would love to know if you defaulted in 5 other marketplaces, or what your track record on delivery might be. And so how do you actually bridge, and what are the concerns around it? And I think where I'm arriving at is that it's not a science, it's more an art. And I kind of like it, because that, it actually showcases the vulnerability associated with bridging. And I think that's a very human problem to solve then, which is interesting to me. And so I can share a little bit on that. Any other thoughts or questions that people would like to cover today? Or if not, I could just jump right into it. Just give me a sec. So this is just, again, a document that Pospy and I decided to just throw together based on conversations we've been having with people in the ecosystem. And you could say there's, broadly speaking, 2 kinds of bridging. The first one is bridging within a HAP bundle. And Hello RSM, from what we hear, makes life significantly simple for multiple DNAs within a HAP bundle. So you actually have the ability to specify what DNAs are part of the bundle. And I think bridging within that bundle is going to be significantly easy. So this case of HAP bundle 1, which has DNAs A, B, and C, let's say user X bridges from DNA C to B to pass an entry onto the DHT. When that is thrown out or gossiped for validation to other users who are in the HAP bundle, they also have access to DNAs A, B, and C. And so when they're validating that entry, they can actually call into DNA B, and that entry should be validated without too much of an issue. The concern is, when you're doing this kind of cross DNA validation, let's say user Y didn't have access to B, it would basically lead to an error in validation. And again, Holochain doesn't have a nuanced raising of issues when it comes to breaking a validation. There's no, oh, this broke because I didn't have access to validate. It's just a monolithic, issuance of a warrant. And so you don't actually, that's actually a very serious problem to contend with, because when a warrant is issued, you don't actually have clarity on why that, there's no data carried with the warrant on why that warrant was issued. And so that's a pretty serious problem that you want to avoid. So in any case, bridging within the app bundle seems pretty straightforward to me. And so if you're attempting it for your app, there shouldn't be as much of a problem. The real issues arise in cases where we're trying to go cross apps or cross communities or cross neighborhoods or cross collectives, where you're not sure that other users would have access to the same DNAs. So let's say, an example, marketplace 1, which has DNAs A, B, and C, and then there's a marketplace 2. And let's say user X is trying to port over data, like that data might be reputational data, like track record of deliveries or fulfillments, or intents, or even defaults on payments. Let's say user X, has a great track record and they're trying to port it to marketplace 1. If you use that in the validation logic for passing the entry, you can't be certain that other users in marketplace 1 will have access to those same DNAs, right? And so it's fairly certain that that validation will break and a warrant will be issued, because user Y couldn't actually access DNA F because they didn't have it installed, because maybe they're not part of marketplace 2. So you don't actually have control over where that entry gets gossiped, and that's one of the big issues that we have to contend with. And so there's different ways to work around it, and I can share some of the pros and cons associated with it. For what you could do is you can pass structure the entry such that when user X is writing it to the DHT, the validation logic is not included. Like, it's not the logic for, or the bridge from DNA C to F isn't in the validation logic. User X actually just sources the entry and then passes that entry. So all that the other users in marketplace 1 are doing are checking for the shape of the entry. If it's the right format. Let's say it's it is text within a certain limit, or maybe it's maybe it's numbers, or it's the shape of the entry is right, but they can't access the source of the entry. And so what you're really relying on is user X to go and fetch the data and then write it to the DHT. Just jump in if any of this isn't making sense, or if I'm going too slow. But yeah, now obviously if user Y doesn't have access to the source of the entry but can validate the shape of the entry, there are some concerns with it. So user X could technically fake that entry or source it from pretty much any source that doesn't even need to be holochain, or manually enter it by, say, forking holochain itself, and you would have no way to know about it. And so there's 3 ways to contend with this issue. One way is user X, when they're fetching the data from the other app, let's say it's marketplace 2, they actually also have to show validation receipts. So in RSM, again, one of the key shifts is we don't have warrants, but validation receipts being issued. So it's almost like framing validation as a positive activity as opposed to issuing the negative flag when it fails. And so you could ask user X to produce a validation receipt. But again, I don't know if that has much meaning, because just like the entry, user X could also be faking the validation receipt. Another option is you allow user X to pass the entry, but at a later stage, there's some kind of audit that's set up possibly suggested a way in which, if there's common members between marketplace 1 and 2 at a later date, they go in and actually audit user X's source chain, or confirm that that entry has been passed into DHT2. And if in case there aren't those, if there is a fraudulent entry, like heavy penalties can be issued on X at a later date. So it's almost like we trust you until you're proven wrong. And that could work in some contexts. Maybe it's not as critical data, or maybe you're a large enough institution where, of any kind of fraud activity actually has significant penalties. But I can totally imagine a world, of distributed cryptocurrencies, something like this totally failing, because it is critical data and almost no tangible repercussions to speak of. So I would say like something like this could be used in those situations that I mentioned, where there are tangible penalties, it can be enforced, or if it's non-critical data. I kind of like the third way to approach this, where you bridge only through trusted nodes. One of the limitations of this is you have to depend on people holding or a common set of people between two marketplaces. And let's say there's user Z who does have access to App Bundle 1 and 2, or Marketplace 1 and 2. So if X is asked to port any kind of reputation data from Marketplace 2, they aren't making the bridge call. What they do is message user Z in Hollow RSM. There's something known as, instead of messaging, it's remote procedure calls, who then bridges to the other DHT and fetches that entry. And the condition here is Marketplace 1 or App Bundle 1 needs to think of Z as a trusted entity. And so there's some kind of human intelligence, or almost like a leap of faith, that App Bundle 1 is taking on Z and saying, we trust you and you can make the bridge calls for us. And so, of course, if this fails, there are, this could, if your trust in Z is wrong, Z could be making those bridge calls fraudulently as well. But yeah, this is basically one of the suggested approaches towards bridging through trusted nodes. And I guess there's a pretty interesting discussion to be had on this topic, because how do you actually make those decisions? I would say in the long run, it's through the construction of what we're calling memetic bridges. And so instead of just one agent that's the trusted node, ideally, you probably have a bunch of them, each one maybe in some way auditing each other if needed, or if it could actually be called through two trusted nodes and then compared to each other before actually writing it to the DHT. So there's a bunch of ways you could address this, but I kind of like the idea of it being through trusted nodes and through building, and as the strength of your memetic bridge across communities grows and strengthens, that actually gives you more confidence in the validity of that data. But yeah, that's pretty much what I had to share about these approaches to bridging. Any questions or comments? Yeah, feel free to unmute and jump in. If not, there's also an interesting, sorry, go ahead, Harlan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I really appreciate the work you've done here, and it's great to see the different ways of bridging spelled out, because when I was looking into it from a development perspective a few months ago, it seemed a little vague. It was kind of like there's some conversations in the forum about like maybe you can do it this way or that, and having the diagrams is a big help.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's also been good to arrive at the consensus that, bridging, at somewhat of a consensus that bridging um, without a node being trusted can also be pretty risky, right? And not a lot of us internalized it, but I think it's been nice to talk about it and understand the risks associated with it. Yeah, I definitely think there's way more conversations to be had. I know, Harlan, you've been involved, or you were commenting on some of the conversations, the sort of bi-directional bridging. I'm not sure, where that is at the moment. I also don't think it may be as critical at this stage. Maybe we um, we build that as we go. There is some interesting conversations associated with, can some bridging not be done at the level of the UI? Let's say, I actually have interacted with you across two apps. My UI could just be bridging into both and framing a picture of who you are. And again, the conversation there is, I think that works for the UI style bridging works for, you could say, non-consensus based views. Like let's say we're in an app, and within that app, how I view other people is really completely subjective and relevant to me, and so it's not being enforced on other people, and so I can bridge across multiple UIs, multiple DNAs, and piece together my vision of you. So it's my unique lens on who you are, and that doesn't necessarily also require your consent, because that is information that I already have access to from prior interactions to you. But I think holochain or DNA based bridging is important for more centralized resources that a community might want to offer its members. So access to the membrane itself, or maybe there's a pool of monetary currencies in the center that are being distributed, or maybe other kind of scarce resources like, only these people have the limelight or the ability to voice themselves. Something of that sort would require DNA based bridging. And we've like personally, this is what I've also been working on, building this concept of a reputation vault, which is like a consent based mechanism allowing people to um, offer their consent before that bridge is established to the different DNAs. And so marketplace 2 might ask you if you'd like to port in information from, I don't know, 10 other marketplaces, but you hold that switchboard which allows that porting to occur. And so that, if you're interested, there's some conversations on the forum around something called a reputation vault, which is basically a switchboard which lets you control which reputation from other contexts port into the new context that you're allowed to enter into. And so a very simple use case of it might be, if you want to enter a membrane, you are allowed to show vouchers or positive track records from 10 other contexts. And if you actually have vouchers in 10 other contexts, you have immediate trusted access to a membrane without actually having to gain trust within that network. So again, a simple example of this might be ride sharing. Like, let's say, one of the concerns with ride sharing moving to smaller cooperatives that are limited by geography is, enforcement of safety records. And let's say you're, as a driver joining a new ride share, but you actually have a track record of safety across 50 other networks, you can actually port that data. And so I think in a ride sharing context, you can actually enable some kind of trust, even without operating at scale. And I think that for me is the best part of porting of reputation data, because you don't actually have to then be a large institution to enforce or amplify some kind of behavior. It can actually happen irrespective of scale. And yeah, I think that potentially could open up new dimensions of interaction, which the internet just doesn't do, because it's not safe enough, or we don't have enough context, or there's not enough feedback loops that prevent seriously negative behavior. And so I think through this kind of reputation porting, you could actually have, unlock these new kinds of activities, which could be fairly intimate. It could be, staying in each other's homes through something like couch surfing, or hosting people in your homes for food, or I don't know, all kinds of things. But more coordinated activity starts opening up, which to me is exciting. So one of happy to field questions. I'm just going with whatever's coming up, or whatever I think is relevant, but we can stop and discuss any topic. We've been developing some of these modules and packaging them as DNAs, and that's really important. So if you want to plug DNAs into your HAP bundle, you can just plug them in as building blocks. And in this case, the reputation likes DNA would be bridging within a HAP bundle, so there's not as many risks associated with it. But the more complex, like let's say I'm starting a new blogging collective, and I actually want to amplify people who've received likes or claps or upvotes across 50 different platforms from day one. I actually need to bridge into these reputation-like modules across 50 different contexts. In that case, you would need trusted nodes in each one of these DNAs. But because they're packaged as separate DNAs, like identifying where that data exists on which DHT, bridging into that DNA without actually clogging up the whole system, that kind of coordinated activity becomes a lot easier when there's small packages or building blocks. And so that's really interesting, because then reputation scores or badges or certifications can actually be issued locally. So I issue my own understanding of what is a gold star writer, based on likes or claps that they might have received on 50 other in 50 other contexts. So that's, anyone who's interested in actually running with some of this stuff, you can go play with some of these modules. We're thinking of releasing some of these other modules as well, claps and upvotes. But we're unsure whether to do it pre-RSM or post-RSM. So let's see. Yeah. Any questions?
Thanks for the education, Sid. I needed it.
Again, like I think Pospi warned me about this before the call, about not positioning this as absolute. I think bridging is going to be super complex. So we only have like best practices as we know them today. And as we keep doing this, we'll figure out the best way forward. But for me, this question has been bugging me for a couple of months now, because if we don't figure out what good bridging is, it can seriously affect the architecture. Like if we don't bridge, we figure out how to bridge across these micro building blocks, we'll end up with pretty monolithic structures, which is a seriously different architecture in my opinion.
I like the idea you mentioned, bringing in consent, like consenting to a certain bridge perhaps. And I like that because, one of the things we love about Holochain is the agent-centric nature, right? Like where I'm in control, I own and control my space, it's autonomous, etc. And I guess I was reflecting, as you were saying, bridging is a hard problem or something similar, that it's one of the hardest problems in human interaction too, right? It's easy when I'm like living in my cave, doing my thing, watching my Netflix, but then when I actually have to get together and collaborate with other humans and bridge in some way, things are get much more interesting. And so I guess what occurs to me, like at a very high level, like above the kind of technical implementation level, is, if there were consent-based mechanisms at the application and interface level, where kind of like we do these days with like signing in, using your sign in from one site to sign into another site. And so it asks you, do you consent to have this site see the pieces of information about you? Like if I could, as a human agent, explicitly authorize consent to specific items every time one of these bridges were to occur, like that's what I would like to experience as a user. And then how we implement that on a technical level, I think there are myriads of ways.
Yeah, I tend to look at it from this lens of wealth, right? Like that's my background. And so finance, economics. And I feel like what we developed with money over the last couple hundred years was pretty interesting. Like the idea that a human has agency over their wealth. And every time you go step out to spend, buy a cup of coffee, like it is your consent, right? Like you actually think about the price and give into that dynamics, that tension between demand and supply. And so for me, consent here is really critical in establishing contextuality. So, because how else do you establish, well, is my reputation in this context related to reputation in this context, right? And so I think that tension being driven by the user who then, gives into that trade, I think will lead to more contextual linkages. So one of the examples we came up with, it came up pretty organically. Kiki and Kamal have been working on something called, well, not Kamal directly, but part of the cooperative, something called Seed Share, like a network of people storing seeds or sharing seeds for permaculture across the world. And Bosby and I were talking, and for me, I was just like, if someone, I would actually link that to couchsurfing or Airbnb in some way. Like if I come across someone who meticulously stores or saves seeds, you're probably someone I want to host, or I feel safe hosting on my couch. And so you could start seeing those kinds of linkages, like between storing seeds and being an Airbnb guest or host. And I think not those patterns can't really be predicted. So you want to give communities the freedom to figure that out themselves. But at the same time, they can't be really arbitrary or, completely unlinked. Like, your coffee appreciation skills may not be linked to your skills as a neurosurgeon. And so the user kind of decides if that contextually makes sense or not. So, yeah, I would say some of this follows some of the liberal economic patterns we've seen over the last few decades, where humans having more agency establish the right price. I think here humans having agency over reputation will establish the right contextual links. And that to me is, yeah, how I'm coming at this and looking at it.
Just wanted to pop my voice in to say thanks, everybody. I'm going to drop off.
Yeah. Thanks, Harlan. Thanks for dropping in.
Pleasure.
Any other thoughts or reflections? Or we could also close early today, or if there's anything else someone wants to talk about. Lynn, are you familiar with the kind of bridging that REA is heavily focused on? I know there's a lot of bridging within a HAP bundle.
I'm familiar with, not technically, but we had a lot of discussions early on within the HAP bundle of what made sense to be a module. But yeah, I don't.
Because technically, yeah, like if I have a bunch of transaction data and I want to port it or give access to it to someone who's not in the DHT, they're really going to struggle to validate. Like there's no real way for them to validate that information, right? Technically.
Right.
And I guess the only way for them to do it is have someone trusted within the network, or for them to join the network itself. So
I mean, validating, validating economic data besides just sort of the obvious, data types and stuff, right, is kind of complex anyway. And,
yeah.
Did you receive this thing? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, so anyone could easily fork holochain itself and start fraudulently producing these entries without you knowing, if you're not part of that DHT. Yeah. There's an interesting question that comes up in holo hosting because not all your apps might be stored on the same conductor, and bridging only occurs on the same conductor. So that's really important to note. And so we've been trying to work through that problem right now. One solution might be for the trusted node to be run on a holochain conductor that has access to as many DNA as possible, and so then that kind of solves the problem. Like you just need one or two of your trusted nodes to have access to all those DNAs, and then that's cool. Holo hosting also has facilities where if it's known in advance that you're going to be bridging to these DNAs, those DNAs are downloaded onto the holo port, but that just leads to a replication of data that can be quite heavy. Another option is to extend the role of the reputation vault, and so the reputation vault stays downloaded on all holo ports, and that makes the bridge calls, because that's through remote procedural calls, it actually messages the nodes that do have the information, the ability to bridge, and then that's, the reputation vault plays a little more extended role in that case. But yeah, those are some of the problems holo ports will throw up.
So Sid, a question that comes to mind, and I apologize if this is dumb because I am too removed from most of this stuff. In economic data, a lot of times, if it's between two agents, if one signs and the other countersigns, and they both have that copy, that's all you need, really,
That is correct.
So how does that fit in, or does it not fit in really to a lot of the kind of validation concerns?
Technically, that totally eases things, right? Like even if they're part of different DHTs or the same DHT, but this might be so. For example, you might not want user X to produce all the likes that they received. You could poll it from all the claps from all the people who've given user X likes. Like that's the other side of the transaction, right? But it's the same thing, right? Like at the end of the day, you have to rely on their information, and maybe they are trusted nodes. But again, it is a leap of faith because that giving of a like is on some other DNA. It's not on your DNA, not on your DHT. Or should it be? Should there be a copy of it pushed to No, yeah, there's no, I mean, at the end of the day, you are making that leap of faith. Because even every time if I'm offering a like, I'm writing it into our shared DHT, there's no way for you to certify that it's also being pushed onto another DHT, unless you're also on that DHT.
Does bridging generally involve duplicate copies of the same record across DHTs or DNAs?
Sorry, explain that. Say that again.
Does bridging generally involve two copies of the same record across that,
Not necessarily. You could have your trusted node going and pulling out user X's written data in the other DHT, but you know that other DHT's got its validation intact, and so you're actually relying on that. So yeah, it doesn't need to be. It could be user X just publishing a blog, and that's just single, like just one directional. Yeah. In any case, I think this is an interesting question because this cross-collective, cross-app operations for me is really exciting about agent centricity. Like there's so much more we can start doing. And so I think it's important we figure that out. Greg, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, sorry. Cool. I think we're coming up on our time. Any closing thoughts or comments? Alban, I'm not sure how directly useful this might have been to you right now, considering you're thinking about implementation of your project, but I think it could be critical if you're thinking about a more modular approach to your project, or if you're thinking of cooperating with a few other collectives that are also building. And so for you to speak that same modular language would be useful.
Yes, absolutely. Very well said, and very nice explained, by the way. It was very useful, the way you elaborated the bridging. And I like the ability to kind of play between, depending on the situation, play between version 1, version 2, or complicated as the situation might arise. So yeah, it is very useful for us because that's actually what we want to do. So, but I'm not as far out as contemplating developing, but nevertheless, it's very useful to understanding what's possibility. So
cool. All right, guys, I think we can close today's session. I don't have anything else from my end. Awesome. Thank you. If any of you have ideas for next week's discussion, let me know. Bye.